There's a specific kind of quiet that only exists in an office after everyone else has gone home. It's not peaceful. It's not the quiet of a library or an empty park. It's the quiet of a space that was built for noise, keyboards, phone calls, the low overlap of a dozen conversations, suddenly stripped of all of it. What's left behind feels almost wrong, like a stage with no actors, like something is about to happen. That was the quiet. I was sitting inside on a Friday night at 8:47 p.m., staring at a quarterly report that still had 40 minutes of work left in it, wondering why I hadn't just come in early Monday morning like a person with any sense of self-preservation. She had asked me to stay. That's why. Not asked, told. Calm, professional, hand resting briefly on the edge of my desk as she passed. The Hendricks report needs to be finished before the weekend. Stay late and close it out. That was it. No please. No apology for the hour. Just the expectation, delivered in that low, even voice she used when something wasn't a question. And then she was already moving away, heels clicking softly against the floor, her attention already somewhere else. I said of course to her back. I always did. The office had been emptying for the past hour. People peeling off in twos and threes, coats pulled on, weekend plans exchanged in passing, the elevator dinging every few minutes like a slow countdown. I watched it happen from behind my monitor, nodded at the goodnights, kept working, and she stayed. That wasn't unusual. She often outlasted the room. She was the kind of woman who treated hours the way she treated everything else, as something to be used fully, without waste. I'd seen her light on past 9 on more than one occasion, the rest of the floor dark around her glass office like she was the only thing still running. But tonight felt different. I couldn't explain it then. It was just a pressure in the air, the specific weight of awareness you get when someone is near you, even when you can't see them. I knew where she was without looking. I always did, and I'd stopped asking myself why a long time ago. She moved through the space behind me at some point. I heard her heels, that particular rhythm, unhurried and certain, and I kept my eyes on my screen the way you keep your eyes forward when something peripheral is too dangerous to look at directly. A few minutes later, she appeared at the edge of my desk. Not hovering, just present. She leaned forward slightly to look at my screen, one hand resting near my keyboard, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something warm and clean and expensive, the same thing she always wore, the thing I had trained myself very deliberately not to think about. How much left? She asked. 20 minutes. Maybe less. She nodded, didn't move immediately, and in the extra second she stayed there, I became very aware of my own breathing, the specific effort it took to keep it regular, to sit still, to look like a person who was simply finishing a report and not someone hyper-aware of the exact distance between her wrist and his hand. Then she straightened, and the moment collapsed back into professionalism, and she walked back toward her office without another word. I stared at the spreadsheet for a full 30 seconds without typing anything. The last person grabbed their bag around 9. Said goodnight to the room on principle, even though I was the only one left. I heard the elevator, the familiar ding, the doors closing. Silence. Just the hum of the building. The distant sound of the city, muffled and indifferent, 20 floors below. My own pulse, which had no business being as loud as it was. And then, from across the office, the soft, deliberate sound of a door, and a lock clicking into place. I turned around. She was standing at the office door, not leaning against it, not hesitating, just standing, one hand still resting where she'd turned the lock, her body already angled toward me like the decision had been made somewhere quiet inside her, and the rest of her was simply catching up. The overhead lights had dimmed to their after-hours setting, softer and lower than the day, and in that light, she looked different. Less like a title, more like a woman. I didn't speak. I'm not sure I could have. She walked toward me. That's the only way to describe it. Not came over, not approached. She walked toward me, with the kind of unhurried intention that made the distance between us feel like something she was choosing to reduce one step at a time, deliberately, giving me every opportunity to say something, to move, to interrupt what was already happening. I didn't move. My brain was doing the responsible thing, running through the list. Boss. Professional. 8 years older. The report's still open on your screen. Monday morning. The floor below you full of people who have opinions. The list was thorough and reasonable, and I heard every word of it. I didn't move. She stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the slight rise and fall of her breathing. Close enough to smell that perfume again. Warmer now. Or maybe I was just closer than I'd ever let myself get. Her eyes held mine with an expression I didn't have a word for yet. Not quite a smile. Something more like certainty. Like a woman who had done the math on something and arrived at an answer she was prepared to stand behind. Her hand came up slowly and pressed against my shoulder. Not hard, not aggressive, just a firm, warm pressure that said back. And I went, sinking into the chair, the leather sighing under me, both of my hands gripping the armrests without deciding to. She wasn't touching me anymore, but I could still feel the shape of that pressure through my shirt, the warmth of her palm already fading in the fabric like a word I was trying to hold on to. I looked up at her. She looked down at me, and something in that look unwound a thing I'd been carrying for months. There was no performance in her face, no careful professional distance, no controlled composure, just honesty. The specific, unhurried honesty of someone who has decided to stop pretending and is finding it quieter on the other side. She reached down and gathered the hem of her dress slightly, a small, pragmatic gesture, almost casual in its confidence. And then she lowered herself onto my lap. The weight of her settled over me with a warmth that hit somewhere behind my sternum and didn't leave. She was facing me, close enough that her breath was part of the air I was breathing, her knees on either side of me, the fabric of her dress pulled across my thighs. For a moment, neither of us moved. The office held its breath around us. Then she shifted, once, slowly, and the air left my body. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't frantic. It had the rhythm of something she'd thought about. A slow, deliberate roll of her hips that pressed her warmth against me and dragged a sound out of me I barely managed to keep behind my teeth. My hands found the armrests again and held them like structure, like anchor, like the last two fixed points in a room that was tilting. She watched my face the entire time. That was the part one wasn't prepared for. Not the weight of her, not the closeness, not even the slow, devastating movement, but the watching. The way she looked at me like she was genuinely curious what I would do, what I looked like when I stopped managing myself. On my desk, 3 feet away, the quarterly report glowed on the screen. I had completely forgotten it existed. Her lips found my ear like she knew exactly where to go. Not a kiss. Not yet. Just the warmth of her mouth close enough to feel, her breath arriving in a slow, measured exhale that moved across the curve of my jaw and settled somewhere at the base of my throat. My hands were still on the armrests. I was still trying to be a person who had a grip on himself. Then she spoke. "I've been watching you," she said. "For weeks." Low. Unhurried. Like a confession she'd already made peace with before she opened her mouth. I didn't respond. I don't think she expected me to. She shifted against me. That same slow, deliberate rhythm. And I felt her nails find the front of my shirt. Not dragging yet. Just resting. Present. Like punctuation waiting to be placed. "The Callaway meeting," she said. "You remember it?" I remembered it. 3 weeks ago. The VP had pushed a projection that didn't hold up, and everyone at the table had nodded along, because that's what you did in rooms like that. Everyone except me. I'd flagged it, quietly, with numbers, without making it personal, and the VP had not been pleased. "You didn't flinch," she said. "You just laid it out. No performance. No apology." A pause. Her hips moved and my jaw tightened. "Do you know how rare that is?" I hadn't thought about it that way. I'd spent 2 days after that meeting half convinced I'd made a career-ending mistake. I'd been watching the door to her office for any indication of fallout, reading every email twice for tone. Apparently, she'd been watching me back and seeing something entirely different. Her nails dragged, finally, slowly across my chest, and the breath I pulled in was uneven in a way I couldn't correct. "The Thursday before that," she continued, her voice unhurried, almost conversational, like she wasn't currently dismantling me from the inside out. "I came past your desk around 6. You were so deep in whatever you were working on you didn't even register me." I remembered that too, suddenly. I'd been untangling a formula error that had been haunting a report for 2 days. I'd been furious at it in that quiet, focused way. "Most people perform," she said. "They hear my heels, and they sit up straighter. They adjust. You didn't even look up." Another slow roll of her hips. Her mouth was still at my ear, still not kissing, just present, just breathing. I stood there for almost a full minute. I didn't know that. The thought of it, her standing behind me, watching me work, choosing me in that quiet moment before I even knew there was a choice being made. Did something to my chest I wasn't ready for. My hands finally left the armrests. They found her waist, not pulling, not demanding, just landing there like they'd been looking for somewhere to go for a very long time. I felt her exhale shift when I touched her. Something in her body softened by a degree she probably thought I wouldn't notice. I noticed. "You're good with the junior staff," she said, quieter now. "You don't make them feel small. I watch how people treat the ones who can't do anything for them. It tells me everything." Her nails were still moving, slow, unhurried lines across my chest, and my hands were holding her waist like a question I hadn't spoken aloud yet. The city hummed below us, indifferent and distant, and the office had narrowed down to just this. Just her weight, her warmth, her voice arriving in pieces against my ear, each piece rewriting something I thought I understood. I had spent months believing she didn't see me. Not really. Not past the spreadsheets and the meetings and the professional distance we both maintained so carefully. I had filed whatever I felt for her under irrelevant and left it there. She had been watching me for weeks. She pulled back just enough to look at me. Really look, and I understood, with a clarity that had no business arriving in a moment like this, that I had been completely wrong. She was still looking at me. Not the way she looked at people in meetings, measuring, strategic, processing. This was different. This was the look underneath that one. The one she didn't hand out in conference rooms or copy on emails or let anyone see from across a professional distance. It was quieter than I expected, more open, like something she'd been keeping behind glass for a long time and had finally decided to stop protecting. My hands were still at her waist. Her nails had stilled against my chest. Not gone, just resting, the light pressure of them present through the fabric, like she wanted to maintain the connection without pushing further. She was waiting. I understood that now. For all her certainty, for all the deliberate intention she'd walked across the office with, she was waiting for me, making sure, giving me the last word on something she'd already decided but refused to take without my agreement. That mattered to me, more than I could have explained right then. I closed the distance. I couldn't tell you who moved first, not honestly. It may have been me. It may have been the both of us, arriving at the same point from slightly different directions at exactly the same moment, the way two people sometimes make the same decision without coordinating it. All I know is that between one breath and the next, her mouth was against mine. Soft, careful, almost a question. For exactly 1 second it was that, tentative, delicate, the kind of kiss that still has an exit built into it. The kind you could step back from and call a mistake if you needed to. Then her fingers curled into the front of my shirt. And it wasn't that anymore. Her mouth opened against mine, and the careful version of this dissolved completely. I felt the shift move through her whole body. Something releasing, something that had been held tightly for a long time finally letting go. And I pulled her closer without deciding to. My hands moving up her back, learning the line of her spine through the fabric of her dress, and she made a sound against my mouth that was barely a sound at all. More of an exhale. More of a surrender so small and private I felt like I'd been trusted with something. My hands found her hair. Her fingers tightened in my shirt. She kissed like someone who meant it. Not performance, not technique, just genuine one applied directly and without apology. I felt the scratch of her nails through the cotton. I felt the slight edge of her teeth, brief and deliberate, and the sound I made in response was not something I had any control over. She smiled against my mouth. She'd heard it. I didn't care. We broke eventually. Not from reluctance, but from necessity, the practical interruption of needing air. She didn't move off my lap. I didn't let go of her. She dropped her forehead against mine, and we stayed there, both of us breathing, the office silent and indifferent around us, the fluorescent hum filling in the space where words weren't yet. I could feel her heartbeat. Not literally, but almost. The warmth of her chest against mine, the pace of her breathing, the way her hands had softened from gripping to simply holding. She was present in a way that had nothing performative about it. No armor, no management, just her. Her thumb moved once against the side of my jaw. Slow, like she was memorizing something. I thought about Monday. Briefly, distantly, the way you think about a weather forecast for a trip that's still a week away. Real, but not yet. Not tonight. Tonight the only thing that existed was her forehead against mine, her weight across my lap, the particular stillness of two people who have just crossed a line they spent a long time pretending wasn't there. She lifted her head, looked at me, and this time the look had something new in it, something warmer and less careful and more hers than anything I'd seen from her before. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. She shifted, not away, never away, but sideways, settling across my lap with her legs draped over one armrest, her shoulder resting against my chest, her head tilted back just enough that I could see her profile. The urgency of a few minutes ago had softened into something quieter, something that felt less like fire and more like the warmth that stays after fire. Deeper, more even, the kind that gets into your bones. My arm found its way around her without consulting me. She let it. For a while neither of us said anything. The city continued its indifferent hum below us. The office held its after-hours stillness. Her thumb traced absent circles against my forearm, slow, unconscious, the kind of touch people give when they've stopped thinking about touching and it's simply become the natural state of their hands. I watched the side of her face and thought about how different she looked right now. Not younger, I don't mean that. Just more visible. The professional precision she wore like a second skin during the day, the composed authority that preceded her into every room. It was still part of her, but it had been set aside. What was underneath it was more interesting. A woman who thought carefully, felt deeply, and had very few spaces where she allowed both of those things to be true at the same time. I got the sense I was sitting inside one of those spaces. She spoke first. I almost moved you to the Hendricks account, she said. Quiet. Conversational. Like she was telling me something about the weather. I looked at her. That's in the Chicago office. Yes. A beat. I understood what she was saying. You were going to transfer me to another city, I said. To stop being distracted by me. She didn't deny it. I drafted the paperwork twice. A pause. Her thumb kept moving against my forearm. Twice I decided it was the professional thing to do. The clean thing. Another pause, smaller. Both times I deleted it. I didn't know whether to be relieved or unsettled. I settled on something in between. Why? I asked. She turned to look at me then. Direct, as always, even now. Because it felt dishonest. Moving you to solve a problem I wasn't willing to name. That's not clean. That's just cowardice with better paperwork. I almost smiled. She caught it. What? She said. Nothing. Just, that's a very you way to put it. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, but close. The expression of someone who has just been seen accurately and found they didn't mind. I told her about the long routes. I hadn't planned to. It just arrived, the way honest things sometimes do when the room is quiet enough. I told her how I used to find reasons to pass her office in the mornings. How I'd gotten very good at making it look incidental. She was quiet for a moment after that. How long? She asked. Longer than I'll admit to right now. She laughed, softly, briefly, and the sound of it hit me somewhere unguarded. I hadn't heard her laugh like that before. Not the polite version she used in meetings. This one was real, unmanaged, over before she could think about it. She looked almost surprised by it herself. Then she asked me if I was afraid. No preamble, no softening. Just the question, direct and honest, the way she did everything. I thought about lying. Considered the version of myself that said no with confidence and meant it. Decided he wasn't available tonight. Yes, I said. She nodded slowly. So am I. She said it without apology and without drama, just as a fact she was willing to share. 2 words that cost her something I understood she didn't spend easily. She wasn't asking me to take the fear away. She wasn't asking me to reassure her. She was just telling me the truth because she thought I deserved it. I held her a little closer without saying anything. She let me. Her private office was darker. No overhead lights. Just the ambient glow of the city coming through the tall windows, soft and gray and distant, the kind of light that makes everything feel slightly removed from consequence. She'd closed the door behind us without looking back. I heard the lock. That sound again. The same one that had started all of this, and something in my chest responded to it the same way. Like a signal my body had already learned. She turned to face me. We were close. Closer than we'd ever stood in daylight. In the professional version of this room, where there was always a desk between us or a meeting to redirect to. Here there was nothing between us. Just the city light and the quiet and the particular stillness of a space that had been chosen deliberately. She reached up and loosened the top button of my shirt. Not hurried, not impatient. Her fingers worked slowly, with the focused attention of someone who had decided to do something properly or not at all. I stood still and let her, watching her face, the slight downward angle of her eyes, the composed expression that had nothing composed about it underneath. When the second button followed the first, I reached up and covered her hands with mine. She looked up. I kissed her, slower this time, without the edge of desperation that had been underneath the first one. This was different. This was two people with nowhere to be and nothing left to pretend, and it moved through me like something being settled. Her hands resumed their work. My shirt came untucked. Her fingers spread flat against my stomach, warm, steady, deliberate, and I pulled in a breath through the kiss that made her smile against my mouth. She stepped back just slightly and reached behind her. I heard the soft give of a zip, watched the dress shift, watched it fall. She stood in the city light without apology. I've thought about that moment many times since. Not the visual of it, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't something, but the quality of how she stood there. No self-consciousness, no performance, just a woman completely at home in herself, in her body, in this decision. The kind of ease that can't be faked and isn't taught. It comes from somewhere deeper than confidence. It comes from having made peace with yourself in private, long before anyone else was in the room. I closed the distance. My hands found her first, her face, her neck, the curve of her shoulder, and then I stopped thinking in sequences. She pulled me toward the couch, and we found each other in the half-dark with the unhurried intention that had defined everything between us tonight. Nothing frantic, nothing careless, just the specific attention of two people who understood that this mattered and handled it accordingly. She was warm everywhere. Her hands knew what they wanted, moved without hesitation, without the tentative quality of uncertainty, with a directness that undid me more than anything else could have. She exhaled against my throat, and I felt it travel the full length of my spine. I learned her the way you learn something you already know you'll want to remember, slowly, carefully, returning to the parts that made her breath change. At some point she said my name, not as instruction, not as urgency, just my name. In her voice, quieter than I'd ever heard it, the professional register completely gone, and it landed somewhere inside me that I hadn't known was available. Afterward, she didn't move away. She stayed, her head resting against my chest, one hand loose at my side, her breathing gradually evening out into something slower and more settled. I held her with my arm across her back and stared at the ceiling and listened to the city do its distant, indifferent thing outside the glass. I thought about every version of this I had never let myself imagine. How none of them had felt like this. How this felt like the most honest thing I'd done in years. The weekend passed the way weekends do after something irreversible happens. Slowly, loudly, inside my own head. I replayed it in pieces, not obsessively, not with regret, but the way you replay something you want to make sure actually happened. The lock clicking, her walking toward me, the city light in her office, her head on my chest afterward, the weight of her arm across my side, the particular silence of two people who have nothing left to manage around each other. She had straightened herself before we left. Composed. Professional. Not cold. Never cold. Not after all of that. But self-possessed in the way she always was, like a woman who could hold two truths simultaneously without letting either one collapse the other. She'd touched my jaw once at the elevator. Said nothing. Let the doors close. I'd stood in the parking garage for a full minute before remembering where I'd parked. Monday arrived the way Mondays always do. Indifferent to everything that happened over the weekend. Indifferent to the fact that the world had quietly rearranged itself inside a locked office on the 20th floor. I dressed carefully without meaning to. Took a slightly longer route in. Told myself I wasn't nervous and almost believed it. The office looked exactly the same. That was the thing that struck me walking in. How completely unchanged everything appeared. Same desks. Same coffee machine running its first cycle. Same overlapping sounds of a floor warming up for the week. Nobody looked up. Nobody knew. The thing that had altered something fundamental in me had left no visible mark on the room whatsoever. I sat down, opened my laptop, stared at the quarterly report. Finished, submitted Friday, already ancient history, and tried to look like a person who was simply starting his week. She arrived at 8:45. I heard her before I saw her. Those heels, that rhythm, unhurried and certain, the same as always. I kept my eyes on my screen with the discipline of someone defusing something. She moved through the floor the way she always did. Spoke briefly to the department head near the windows. Collected something from the printer. Did not look in my direction. I breathed through it. This was fine. This was professional. This was two adults who understood the complexity of what existed between them and were handling it with appropriate discretion. I was fine. She walked past my desk. Didn't stop. Didn't look. The air shifted slightly as she passed. That perfume, warm and clean, the same thing that had been against my skin 72 hours ago. And then she was gone, moving toward her office, already reaching for her door. I exhaled, and then something landed on my keyboard. A folded piece of paper. Small. Precise. The fold exact in the way that everything she did was exact. I looked up, but she was already through her door, already settling behind her desk, already the composed and unreachable version of herself that the rest of the floor knew. I looked back down, unfolded it. Dinner. My terms. 7 p.m. Don't be late. No name. No softening. No question mark. Just the statement, clean and direct and entirely her, delivered on a folded square of paper in the middle of a Monday morning like it was the most natural thing in the world. I read it twice. Then I put it flat on the desk and looked at my screen and smiled like an idiot for approximately 10 seconds before I collected myself. I looked up. She was in her glass office, in a meeting already, tablet in hand, saying something to two colleagues who were nodding along with the focused attention she commanded without effort. She wasn't looking at me. She was working, fully, the way she always worked. And then, between one moment and the next, she glanced across the floor. Found me immediately, like she always knew exactly where I was. Held it for just a second, just long enough. In that look was Friday night, and the folded note, and everything that came after 7 o'clock. In that look was the fact that she had thought about it all weekend, the same as me, and arrived at the same answer. She looked away first, back to her meeting, back to the room that had no idea. I looked back at my screen. Don't be late. I wasn't planning on it.